Once again, I'd like to thank Squarespace for sponsoring this week's video.
Well, hello everybody. I hope you're all doing great. This whole week has been a little bit of a disaster for me in terms of photography. This is the fourth time that I've been out this week to take photographs and try and get a vlog together, and I haven't been very successful, partly because of the weather. It's raining right now and it's extremely windy, and also partly because I really screwed up. So the first outing, I went out with Gavin and we went to an area called Sutton Pass, and it was really beautiful up there. It's kind of on the way to Tofino. It's a high point and it usually snows up there. But we went up there to try and get photographs of the clouds moving in and out of the mountains. And it was happening, but I was having a hard time getting inspired. It was really nice to just kind of hang out hang out with Gavin, because I hadn't been doing much with him lately. And yeah, it didn't quite work out the way we had planned. And then I came out to this area here, and it was just absolutely miserable. This is Englishman River Falls, so I gave up that attempt. And then yesterday, the weather was really quite lovely. We had nice light. Gavin showed me a new area with a nice little waterfall, which was quite pretty. And I was just photographing and videotaping, happy as could be. Got some video footage. And at about 2 o'clock or so, we went to another area, and I thought, oh, I better just check the video that I've taken for the blog. And no sound. I forgot to turn on the lav mic. I don't know. It's something that I do quite often. I screw up more than I'd like to admit, but you guys just don't see that. So I'm out again to attempt to try and get something together here. So as I said, the weather isn't looking terribly exciting, but I've come down to the waterfall in hopes of getting some shots of the waterfall, and I actually have something in mind that I want to kind of experiment and share with you. So let's see if we can actually get a vlog in today. All right.
Struggling with the long run of an outdated
All right, we made it to our first spot. Now, I can't take credit for this little spot here. Gavin showed me this area a few days ago, and it's just absolutely fantastic because we have all of these exposed roots. I guess at some point the river floods and washes away all the topsoil, and then you get these exposed roots. It's not great for the trees because well, all of these trees are dead except for this one. But the roots are just beautiful. One of the reasons why we didn't take any photographs the other day of this root system is just that the light wasn't terribly exciting. And today it's kind of the same. There's no directional light. There's no atmosphere in the background to kind of separate these trees from the background. It's quite a busy scene. It'd be really cool if the water was up here and swirling around, but we might have to wait for a really heavy rain for that. But what I've decided to do today is do a little bit of an experiment. Now, in the past, I've talked about shooting JPEGs, and for the most part, JPEGs are really meant, well, I think, for, say, sports photographers or wildlife photographers, where you really want to shoot a lot of images and just keep shooting and shooting so that you're not blocking up your buffer on your cards. The other reason is, you know, if you really want a quick shot that you can send off somewhere, or you're working for the press or whatever, JPEGs are great for that. I remember I did a trail run, a race several years ago, and the photographer there, he was shooting JPEGs just because so many people were running through, and he would take multiple shots of everybody going through a certain area. I think when I went through this area, I did a kind of a jump, kind of went up like this, and he caught that. And it was for the same reason. He just wanted to take lots of images really quickly. But I've said this a couple of times in the past, and I'll say it again now. Not everybody is into sitting behind a computer and processing images. And that's one of the reasons why companies like Luminar have come up with artificial intelligence processing. You have all these filters, or these, you know, you can basically just push a button and you can do pretty much anything to your photograph. You can create a mood by just some kind of filter on your phone or on your computer or whatever. And for the most part, I don't have a problem with that. But when it comes to serious landscape photography, where you aren't really rushing around, there isn't really a need to take JPEGs. You're obviously going to get way more information in a RAW file than you are in a JPEG. And, you know, if you really want to spend the time, you can do some dodging, burning, or whatever you happen to do in Photoshop or Lightroom or whatever program you happen to use. But as I've said before, in the past, I've noticed that, especially on workshops, there are a lot of people that take photographs. They love the process of actually making images, but when it comes to processing, they might have a backlog of images from 2 to 3 years ago. So they're just not into processing those images. And let's face it, sometimes if you get really involved in an image, it can take a long time to process that photograph. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with that. If you enjoy doing that, then you should do that. And I do that. But there are times where a JPEG would probably just suit the bill fine. And the neat thing about JPEGs, it's kind of like shooting film. If you want to learn about light and how light interacts with the environment or your landscape, if you want to see how contrast affects your photograph, then JPEGs are a great way to do that. As an example, the last few weeks I've been doing an awful lot of printing, and whenever you do any kind of printing, you have quite a large choice of different papers that you can use. And depending on what the subject is and what you want the final outcome to look like, you choose your paper to kind of match your vision of what you want that print to look like. So as a great example, if I want to make a print that has tons of contrast, vibrancy, saturation, just kind of blows your socks off with color and so on, then I'm probably more likely to print on a glossy or a semi-gloss paper where there is more contrast and more color, more vibrancy. If I wanted something a little bit more subdued, then I would probably print on something like a matte paper with some nice texture in it, a nice thick art paper, and so on. And the choices are just endless. And it's kind of the same with JPEGs. A lot of the modern cameras now, especially the Fuji cameras that I'm using, you have a multiple selection of different profiles that you can use for your JPEGs. Now I will say this about Fuji, they do have their color science down pat because they've been producing film for many, many years now. And you have a selection of different profiles for JPEGs. So you can have Velvia, Astia, Provia, Across, which is a black and white film, even a negative film. And it'll simulate what those films used to be like in the old film days. And to be quite honest with you, even the raw files, the color on a lot of the raw files that I'm getting is absolutely superb. There's still contrast, there's still natural colors. And as most of you have seen in my videos, I always show the raw file to start with and then my processed image. And 9 times out of 10, I have to do very, very little. So what it all really boils down to is finding good subject matter and photographing that subject matter in good light. If you can do those two things, then you're well on your way to not having to do very much processing at all. And also, if you don't like processing, as I've said before, then try to do as much in camera as possible. So what I've decided to do today is actually go through all of those profiles for JPEGs with different film simulations, more for my own interest than anything, just to see how they handle contrast, colors, and so on. But as I said, the light is not great today, so I can pretty much guess how the results are going to come out. They're going to come out looking pretty flat and they won't have very much depth to them. Okay, now I will say right off the bat here, I am at a little bit of an advantage because I'm using a medium format Fuji camera. There's a lot more dynamic range, so you can really, keep a lot of those shadows and highlights within a JPEG. If you're using a camera with a smaller sensor, then your exposure has to be a little bit more spot on than say with a medium format camera. Right, let's find a composition here and go through all the different profiles, and hopefully it won't start raining and I'll get some of the waterfall. I have to tell you that I really dislike using the panel on the back of the camera to compose images. I've said this before, if you wear glasses, it's just an absolute pain in the butt. I find it to be a pain in the butt anyway. I'm still waiting for the EVF for this. It is in the mail, so I'm really looking forward to getting it because it's just so much easier to use. All right, I think I found a composition. As I said though, the light is just not that interesting. And you can see in the preview here, it doesn't have any depth. And it has nothing to do really with the composition necessarily. It's just that there's no directional light. So as a great example, this tree on the right side here, it really just blends in with the background. There's nothing to separate it, so it looks very one-dimensional. But having said that, the composition is still worthy, I think. I really love this root coming down, and it kind of curves around to these other 3 trees in the background here. So I think it'd be a good place to come back to when there's just a little bit more light coming from the side. But anyway, we'll have to leave that for another day. So this is the composition I've settled on, 16 by 9. And I think I'm going to stop down to f16. We're at 1 second, ISO 100. It's reasonably calm. Now as far as focus goes, I think I'm just going to focus on this tree at the back here, right there. Oh, let's just tighten up the tripod head here. Actually, it's a bit too far over. Let's try it there. Maybe there. All right, so let's see how that goes. All right, so we'll just have a quick look at that. Okay, now that looks okay. We've got some nice roots in there. It's nice and sharp there, except there's a little bit of movement with the shrubs and such. You can see there's movement in the trees there. But this is more of an experiment, so it doesn't really matter too much. And the foreground is nice and sharp too, the tree on the right. So the first thing I'm going to do here is just go through all of the different film simulations here. So the first one we're on is Valvia. So we've taken a shot of Valvia. I have this set up so that I'm taking raw files as well as really fine JPEGs. See, if you are going to use the JPEG mode and display your JPEGs or post them straight from camera, I still think it's important to have a raw file as a backup. And you never know, you might want to work on it later on. So let's go to Astia, and we'll give that a go. Okay, so I'm not going to go through every single one of these with you, but you get the idea, and then we'll review them on the computer at home and kind of analyze the results.
All right, now I almost screwed up this whole video. I'm not doing very well this week. The first image with the Valvia, when I was showing you in the video there, I almost screwed it up because I didn't change the shutter speed for whatever reason. So my first series of images are all underexposed, especially as the light got darker and darker, and eventually it did start to pour with rain. So this is the Valvia version. It's a little bit underexposed, so I've just brightened it up a little bit to go with the other images that I'm going to show you. So Valvia, as predicted, very saturated in color, and Valvia was very well known for being saturated in the greens and the yellows, and this is a prime example of that. I mean, it was a very green scene to start with, but Valvia will really enrich those colors and also add quite a bit of contrast. So if you are photographing in bright sunshine, I probably wouldn't go with Valvia because it doesn't have as much dynamic range as, say, Provia or Astia. Just as a comparison, here is an old image that I took many, many years ago, and actually in the same area, Englishman River Falls. I probably took this about 15, 20 years ago now. It was one of the first 4x5 images that I ever took. And this was with Valvia. As you can see, now even though this is a drum scan, the colors are very saturated. You'll also notice, it's quite interesting, but the shadows are very black. So the contrast and the colors, I mean, it was a beautiful film. I remember when it first came out, a lot of photographers weren't too keen on it because of the saturation, especially compared to the Kodachromes. This next image here, this is Provia, and you'll notice that the greens aren't quite as saturated, and this would probably be a good all-rounder. Same with the Astia. Astia is even less saturated, and you're a little bit more open in the shadows there. So ideally, I would probably go with Provia, Astia, and possibly Classic Chrome, although this is looking pretty drab. Might look good in a scene that is overly saturated in color and you want to tone it down a little bit, or perhaps you want something a little bit more subdued. But ideally, I would probably just go with Astia and Provia for most scenes. I also shot a little bit of Eterna, which I think is more for video. I'm not a huge fan of the bleached out look, but I do like Eterna when I'm using video. I quite like the effect. Not the bleached out bypass effect, just Eterna in general. And then the last two, across black and white film, as you can see here, because we don't have any directional light, everything just blends in with one another. But very nice black and white, very nice tones. But I would probably be more inclined to convert a raw file into black and white. I have a little bit more control over your highlights and your shadows and so on. But in a pinch, I think this would work great. And then lastly, the sepia. It works great for some scenes, but it definitely doesn't work very well for this scene. Everything just kind of blends into one another. You've lost the trees in the background. So it's just not going to work with this scene here at all. Once again, I'd like to thank Squarespace for their continued support of my channel. Over the last week or so, I've been updating my website store, and Squarespace have certainly made the task an easy one. Listing my products, adding descriptions, prices, keeping track of stock, payments, taxes, and shipping can all be integrated and customized into your website very easily and quickly with a Squarespace website. Whether you're a pro photographer wanting to sell your work or an amateur who wants to show the world your art, Squarespace has all of the tools to get you set up. Interested? Head on over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and if you enjoy what you find, use the code AdamGibbs for 10% off your first purchase.
Well, it's absolutely raging today, and it's gotten really gloomy, starting to rain. It's pretty dramatic though. I really quite enjoy coming to this waterfall. It's only about a 15-minute drive from my house, so you probably recognize it from other videos. But what I like about it is there's so much variation, especially throughout the year. Obviously in the summer there isn't as much water, but then you get more exposed rocks, and I don't know, it's just a bit easier to find compositions when there's a little bit more exposed. But right now, I really like this section right here, because usually in the summer there's no water going over that at all. The only thing that really bugs me still, and I think I made a video last year about the waterfall here, I'll try and find it, I'll leave a link up in the corner here, but we have this log that goes across the top here, and it's really hard for me to get down low enough so that I can kind of get rid of it. But what I'll do is I'll go through the same process as I did with the last image. I'll find the composition, try the different the film profiles, take some raw shots as well, and then compare them to the raw files. I'll also, if I find something half decent, I'll also process a raw file as well, so that we can kind of see how much work I had to do on it to bring out some of the depth.
Okay, now the next examples here, I found that my little test worked a little bit better in kind of giving you an idea of how these films react to scenes. Again, the day was very miserable. There was no direct sunlight or anything. But in this particular scene, I think the film simulations worked okay, because there is a lot of contrast between the waterfall and, of course, those very dark rocks. Now, I didn't use a polarizer because I kind of liked that sheen on the rocks. This first example is, again, Valvia. And as you can see, it's very contrasty, and there's quite a bit of blue in here. Now, you don't really notice the blue until you start to compare it with some of the other films. So this is Valvia. And then this particular image here is Provia, and slightly less contrast. Again, I think if I was going to go for this scene with the film simulations, I would definitely probably go with the Astia or the Provia. And this example here is the Astia. And there's not a huge difference between the Astia and the Provia in this particular case. I also shot some classic chrome. You'll notice that the color temperature is slightly different. I should have mentioned at the beginning that my color temperature for all of these photographs was just set to sunny conditions. I just leave it on sunny all the time. I don't leave it on auto or overcast or anything like that. I just leave it on sunny, especially, well, for JPEGs. For raw files, it doesn't really matter so much. So the classic chrome has a lot more room to wiggle around with the shadows and the highlights. And then Eterno was somewhat of a surprise. It almost looks like it's black and white. And this is the Eterno bleach pass. I quite like the effect. I like the tones. It's quite cool. but I quite like it. I think it works quite well with this type of scene. And then lastly, across. And I thought the across worked really well with this scene because we have a lot of contrast. We have some deep blacks, and then of course we have some whites as well. So what I did for this scene, I wasn't that keen on this composition with the bridge and all that. So I moved over to my right, and I got this scene here, which I quite like. I especially like the moody mist in the background with the trees in the background. At this point, it was pouring with rain, and I would have liked to have stayed a little bit longer because the conditions were really quite beautiful for this scene, but I was just getting absolutely drenched. So I'll have to go back another day. And lastly, we have the RAW file. Not an awful lot different than the JPEGs. And the very last image here is a processed image with the bridge cropped out and some dodging and burning. And I also changed the color temperature just ever so slightly. I hope you got something out of this video. Thank you ever so much for watching this week. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave me a thumbs up. And if you'd like to leave a comment, that's always appreciated as well. Until next week, thank you ever so much. Bye-bye.